A 5-month-old baby disappears from her crib in the middle of the night, leaving behind no sound, no struggle, no trace. There is no broken window, no forced door, no witness who heard anything unusual. Just absence. In 1997, this quiet disappearance in Florida became one of the most unsettling mysteries, raising a question that still lingers today. How does a child vanish from the very place designed to keep her safe? A crib is meant to be a boundary, a small, protected world. Yet in this case, it became the center of something impossible to explain. The silence surrounding that moment is not peaceful. It feels deliberate, as if something erased itself along with the child. Before that night, life in Valrico, Florida, moved at a predictable rhythm. It was the kind of suburban neighborhood where routines created comfort. Lawns were trimmed, lights turned off at the same hour, and neighbors exchanged familiar greetings. Nothing about the area suggested danger. It was not the kind of place where people locked their doors out of fear. The Aisenberg family lived within that quiet structure. From the outside, they appeared ordinary, even stable. 2 working parents, 2 young children, a modest home that reflected careful maintenance. There were no visible signs of instability, no public conflicts, no obvious fractures. Their life followed the same quiet pattern as the homes surrounding them, blending into normalcy without effort. Days passed without incident. Evenings ended with routine, meals, baths, bedtime. The repetition created an illusion of safety, reinforcing the belief that nothing unexpected could happen. This is often how environments conceal tension, not through chaos, but through consistency. When everything looks the same, it becomes easier to ignore what cannot be easily seen or measured. At the center of this story is Sabrina Aisenberg, a 5-month-old infant entirely dependent on those around her. She was small, quiet, and in the earliest stage of life where awareness is limited but trust is absolute. Her world was defined by proximity. Whoever held her, fed her, or placed her down controlled everything she experienced. She lived in a home that appeared secure. A clean crib, familiar surroundings, and the constant presence of family. At that age, she could not speak, could not move independently, could not signal danger in any meaningful way. Her vulnerability was total. That vulnerability is what makes her disappearance not only disturbing, but deeply unsettling on a psychological level. Because when someone so defenseless vanishes, the mind searches for explanation in the environment closest to them. It does not immediately imagine complexity. It returns instead to proximity. Who was there? Who was not? What changed? And more importantly, what did not change, even when something clearly should have? Marlene Aisenberg, Sabrina's mother, was the primary caregiver. She spent the most time with the infant, managing the routines that define early motherhood. Those who knew her described her as attentive, but also strained at times. This is not unusual. Caring for an infant demands constant vigilance, and that pressure often builds quietly beneath the surface. Steve Aisenberg, the father, maintained a more structured distance due to work. He was present, but not constantly involved in the day-to-day care. His role followed a familiar pattern seen in many households. Supportive, but removed from the continuous demands of infancy. That separation, while normal, can create subtle imbalances in responsibility and emotional load. There was also a young sibling in the home, still too small to understand or articulate events with clarity. This detail matters, not because it adds information, but because it removes it. There would be no reliable account from within the house, no secondary perspective to confirm or contradict what had happened during the night. Neighbors reported nothing unusual. No strange vehicles, no unfamiliar figures, no sounds that broke the stillness. The neighborhood remained consistent with its identity. Quiet, predictable, uneventful. In many investigations, external disruption provides the first clue. Here, there was none. The absence of disturbance became its own form of evidence. The house itself reflected that same absence. No signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no indication of struggle or urgency. Everything remained in place, as if the night had passed without interruption. Yet something had clearly happened. Something precise enough to leave no visible disruption, but significant enough to remove a child entirely. This creates a tension between what is seen and what must be true. The environment suggests normalcy, while the outcome confirms the opposite. That contradiction is where unease begins. Because when reality does not align with evidence, the mind is forced to consider possibilities that feel uncomfortable, even intrusive. In many cases, investigators look for chaos as proof of intrusion. Broken locks, shattered glass, scattered belongings. These are tangible signals of disruption. But here, there was only order. And sometimes, order is more disturbing than chaos, because it suggests intention, control, and the possibility that whatever occurred did not require force at all. Beneath the surface of ordinary life, there can exist pressures that never become visible to outsiders. Fatigue, emotional strain, unresolved tension. These elements rarely announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, shaping behavior in subtle ways. And while there is no direct evidence of conflict, the possibility cannot be entirely dismissed. Psychologically, the home is both a place of safety and the most likely setting for hidden stress. It is where people are least observed, least filtered, and most vulnerable to their own internal states. When something unexplainable happens within that space, it forces a difficult question. Was the danger external, or had it always been inside? But no one in the neighborhood could have imagined that within a single night something irreversible would occur. No warning, no escalation, no visible shift. Just a quiet home, a sleeping child, and a morning that would reveal an absence impossible to ignore. But no one in the neighborhood could have expected that in just one night, a child would disappear without leaving behind a single trace. The evening of November 23, 1997 unfolded without disruption. Inside the Aisenberg home, routines were followed with quiet precision. Sabrina was fed, changed, and eventually placed into her crib. Nothing about the process suggested urgency or concern. It was a sequence repeated many times before, reinforcing a sense of normalcy that, in hindsight, feels almost deceptive. Marlene Aisenberg was the last person to see Sabrina alive. She completed the final check, ensuring the infant was settled and calm. There were no signs of discomfort, no unusual crying, no indication of illness. The baby's breathing was steady, her presence quiet. It was the kind of moment that passes unnoticed, because nothing appears to require attention or memory. In households with infants, these final moments of the night carry a fragile significance. They are often routine, but they also mark a temporary separation between caregiver and child. Trust is placed in the environment. The crib becomes a contained space, assumed to be secure. That assumption would later become one of the most difficult elements to reconcile. There were no reported visitors that evening, no unfamiliar faces, no unexpected interruptions. The neighborhood itself remained still, consistent with its usual patterns. Lights turned off gradually, doors closed, and the collective rhythm of sleep settled in. From every observable angle, the night appeared uneventful, almost indistinguishable from countless others before it. The family went to bed believing everything was as it should be. This belief is important because it establishes the baseline. There was no heightened alertness, no perceived threat. When people feel safe, they do not prepare for intrusion. They do not anticipate loss. They surrender to rest, assuming the environment will remain unchanged until morning. Sometime between those final moments and the early hours of the next day, something occurred that would never be fully understood. There is no precise timestamp, no recorded disturbance. The gap between night and morning became a void in the timeline. And within that void, Sabrina disappeared without leaving behind a single confirmed signal. At approximately 6 in the morning, Marlene entered the nursery. The action itself was routine, part of the daily rhythm of care. But what she encountered immediately disrupted that pattern. The crib was empty. The space where the child had been placed hours earlier now held nothing. No blanket displaced. No object disturbed in any obvious way. The nursery door was open. Not broken, not forced, simply open. This detail would later carry weight, not because it confirmed anything, but because it failed to clarify. An open door can suggest many things: carelessness, intention, or something in between. Without additional evidence, it becomes an ambiguous detail that resists interpretation. There were no sounds reported during the night. No cries, no footsteps, no sudden disturbances that might have alerted anyone in the house or nearby. This absence of noise is particularly unsettling. Infants are not silent by nature. Any disruption involving them typically produces some form of reaction. Here, there was only silence, uninterrupted and complete. In that moment, the quiet of the house transformed. What had once been a sign of peace now became a source of fear. Silence can comfort, but it can also conceal. When expected sounds do not occur, the mind begins to question what has been missed. That is where unease takes hold, not in what is heard, but in what is not. Marlene's reaction was immediate. Panic replaced routine. She called for Steve, her voice carrying a sense of urgency that broke the stillness. The shift from calm to alarm was abrupt, reflecting the sudden collapse of expectation. Within moments, the situation moved beyond the boundaries of a private concern and into something far more serious. Authorities were contacted quickly. Law enforcement responded within a short period, recognizing the severity of a missing infant. From the beginning, the situation was treated with urgency. Time is critical in such cases, and the absence of delay often shapes the direction of an investigation. Yet even with a rapid response, answers did not emerge. A search began almost immediately. Officers moved through the house methodically, examining each room, each corner, each possible hiding place. The surrounding neighborhood was also checked, along with nearby wooded areas. The process was thorough, structured, and driven by the assumption that some trace would eventually surface. But no trace appeared. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no physical evidence pointing in any clear direction. The absence persisted, extending beyond the crib and into the broader environment. Each negative result added another layer of uncertainty. With every location cleared, the question only became more difficult to answer. This lack of evidence began to shift the focus inward. When external intrusion cannot be confirmed, investigators often consider those within the immediate environment. It is not an accusation, but a process of elimination. In this case, the home itself became the center of attention, not just as a location, but as a closed system. Some elements of the parents' statements were later described as inconsistent, not overtly contradictory but lacking perfect alignment. These subtle discrepancies drew attention because they disrupted narrative coherence. Under pressure, memory often fragments and reorganizes itself. Stress distorts recall in quiet ways, yet even small inconsistencies can shape perception, especially when investigators are left without stronger, more concrete leads. Their emotional responses were also closely examined, a common but controversial practice in investigations. Grief does not follow a universal pattern, and individuals express distress differently. Some appear visibly overwhelmed, while others remain controlled or distant. Interpretation of these reactions often reflects observer bias, yet despite its subjectivity, it continues to influence public perception and investigative direction in meaningful ways. Despite growing suspicion, there was no direct physical evidence linking either parent to a crime. No forensic confirmation, no definitive indication of wrongdoing. The case remained suspended between possibility and uncertainty. This is where many investigations begin to stall, when intuition points in one direction, but tangible evidence refuses to follow, leaving conclusions unsupported and fragile. In the months that followed, federal investigators adopted a covert strategy, recording private conversations between the parents over an extended period. These recordings captured fragmented statements, later analyzed from multiple perspectives. Some phrases appeared ambiguous, open to interpretation rather. Then conclusion. There was no clear confession, only uncertainty, and what investigators uncovered ultimately deepened the mystery further. From the earliest hours, investigators approached the home with methodical precision. Every surface was examined, every object considered. The crib, the floors, the door frames, all were checked for signs of disturbance, yet nothing unusual emerged. There were no foreign fingerprints, no displaced items, no evidence suggesting a struggle had taken place within that confined and intimate space. Doors and windows were inspected carefully. Each entry point remained intact, undamaged, and locked, or closed in a way that suggested no forced access. This detail narrowed the range of plausible scenarios. A stranger entering and leaving without creating any trace seemed increasingly unlikely. The house appeared sealed, functioning almost like a closed system during the night. This absence of intrusion evidence created a psychological pivot in the investigation. When external explanations lose strength, attention naturally shifts inward. It does not immediately imply guilt, but it redirects focus. The home, once considered a sanctuary, now became a contained environment where every occupant, every movement, and every timeline demanded closer examination under scrutiny. Yet despite this shift, the investigation encountered an immediate obstacle. There was simply not enough physical evidence to construct a clear narrative. No fibers, no biological traces, no definitive indicators of what had occurred. The case began to stall not because of lack of effort, but because of the absence of something tangible to build upon. As days passed, the story moved beyond Valrico and into the national spotlight. Media outlets across the United States picked up the case, drawn to its unsettling nature. A missing infant, a silent home, and no clear explanation created a narrative that captured public attention. The mystery itself became a form of psychological tension shared across a wide audience. Public opinion quickly divided. Some believed firmly in the possibility of an abduction, imagining an unknown figure moving silently through the night. Others focused on the improbability of that scenario, questioning how such an act could occur without leaving evidence. Suspicion began to gravitate toward those closest to the child, not out of certainty, but out of logic. The Aisenberg family found themselves in an increasingly complex position. They appeared on television, appealing for information, expressing concern, and asking for the return of their daughter. These appearances were intended to generate leads, but they also exposed them to public scrutiny. Every word, every gesture became subject to interpretation. Media attention does not remain neutral. It amplifies certain details while diminishing others. In this case, subtle inconsistencies in statements gained disproportionate attention. What might have been dismissed under normal circumstances became focal points. The pressure of being observed can alter behavior, creating a feedback loop between perception and response. Investigators began to consider the parents as primary persons of interest. This decision was not based on definitive proof, but on the convergence of circumstantial factors. The lack of external evidence combined with minor discrepancies in their accounts created a framework where internal involvement became a possibility that could not be ignored. One proposed theory centered on the idea of an accidental event within the home. In this scenario, something unintended occurs during routine care, followed by a decision to conceal the outcome. Psychologically, such responses are not unprecedented. Under extreme stress, individuals may act in ways that prioritize immediate avoidance over long-term consequence, distorting judgment. The recordings obtained by federal investigators became a focal point in this theory. Conversations captured over time revealed fragmented statements that some interpreted as revealing underlying knowledge. However, these interpretations were far from unanimous. Language under stress can be ambiguous, shaped by emotion, fatigue, and the pressure of constant suspicion. Critically, there was no forensic evidence to support the idea of a concealed crime. No remains were discovered, no physical trace linked the parents to an act of harm. The case existed in a space where psychological interpretation attempted to fill the void left by missing material proof. This imbalance created ongoing tension within the investigation. Looking deeper into the family's background, no criminal history emerged. There were no prior incidents suggesting violence or neglect. However, the absence of a record does not eliminate the presence of stress. Raising young children often involves sleep deprivation, emotional strain, and shifting dynamics within a household, all of which can influence behavior in subtle ways. Some inconsistencies in statements continued to surface, though none were decisive. These variations could be attributed to the normal fragmentation of memory under pressure. Yet within the context of an unsolved disappearance, even minor deviations carried weight. Each inconsistency became another thread, not strong enough alone, but collectively difficult to dismiss. In 2001, the investigation reached a critical turning point. Prosecutors moved forward with charges against the parents, relying heavily on the recorded conversations as evidence. It was a moment that suggested resolution might finally be within reach, that the ambiguity surrounding the case could be transformed into a legal conclusion. However, that momentum did not hold. The court later ruled that key evidence had been obtained improperly, rendering it inadmissible. Without those recordings, the prosecution lost its foundation, and what once seemed like progress collapsed, returning the case to uncertainty once again. With the charges dismissed, the case effectively reset. There were no new suspects, no additional leads, and no physical evidence to revisit. Years of investigation produced only speculation. The disappearance remained unresolved, suspended, between competing theories that could neither be confirmed nor fully dismissed. Nearly 3 decades have passed, and Sabrina Aisenberg has never been found. There is no confirmed location, no physical trace, no definitive conclusion. Time has not clarified the mystery. Instead, it has deepened it. Without a body, without a perpetrator, the case exists in a suspended state, held together only by competing theories and unresolved questions that refuse to disappear. When evidence fails, theories begin to take its place. They do not provide answers, but they offer structure, a way to organize uncertainty into something that can be examined. In this case, 2 primary explanations have endured over time. Both attempt to make sense of the same silence. Both rely on logic. And both remain incomplete. The first theory suggests an event that originated inside the home, an accident during routine care, followed by a decision shaped by panic. In moments of sudden crisis, human behavior can shift rapidly. Rational thought becomes secondary to immediate emotional response. The need to avoid consequence can override the instinct to seek help, altering the course of events permanently. Supporters of this theory often point to the absence of forced entry. The home showed no signs of intrusion, no indication that someone from outside had entered or left. This detail aligns with the idea that the event occurred within a controlled environment. It suggests that whatever happened did not require access from beyond the household. They also reference the inconsistencies in the parents' statements. While not definitive, these variations create doubt. Combined with the recorded conversations that contained ambiguous language, some interpret these elements as indirect indicators of concealed knowledge. Not proof, but fragments that seem to resist simple explanation, inviting suspicion rather than resolution. Yet this theory carries significant weaknesses. There is no physical evidence confirming that an accident occurred. No remains were ever found, no trace of concealment discovered. For such an event to remain entirely hidden over decades would require a level of precision and secrecy that is difficult to fully reconcile with the available information. The second theory proposes an external actor, a stranger entering the home, removing the child, and leaving without detection. While rare, such cases do exist. They are unsettling precisely because they violate expectations of safety. They suggest that even the most secure environments can be breached under the right conditions. This perspective explains one critical element: the absence of a body. If the child was taken away, it becomes easier to understand why no remains were discovered. The lack of physical evidence within the home aligns with the idea that the event extended beyond its boundaries, moving the point of resolution elsewhere, beyond immediate reach. However, this theory also faces serious challenges. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no witnesses. The neighborhood itself was quiet, with no reports of suspicious activity. For a stranger to enter, locate the child, and leave without producing any detectable trace would require an extraordinary level of planning and execution. When these theories are placed side by side, a tension emerges. The first aligns more closely with the physical environment, explaining the absence of intrusion. The second accounts for the missing body, offering a reason why no trace was found. Each resolves part of the puzzle, but neither completes it. Both leave critical gaps unaddressed. This leads to a question that remains open even now. Which explanation feels more consistent with what we know? And perhaps more importantly, which uncertainties are easier to accept? A hidden event within the home or an invisible presence from outside? The answer often reflects not just logic, but personal perception of risk and trust. From a psychological perspective, both scenarios reveal different aspects of human behavior. In the case of an internal accident, concealment can emerge from panic. When individuals feel trapped between consequence and exposure, they may act in ways that prioritize immediate survival over truth, even if those actions create long-term consequences. In the case of an abduction, the psychology shifts toward opportunity and observation. Such an act would likely involve prior awareness, recognition of vulnerability, and the ability to move without detection. It demands patience, calculation, and a readiness to exploit moments when others feel safest, turning routine into exposure while leaving behind little to no trace. The behavior of the parents continues to influence perception, not as proof, but as ambiguity. Their words and inconsistencies shape doubt over time. From a broader philosophical view, the case challenges belief in complete understanding, suggesting some truths remain beyond evidence, resisting the frameworks we rely on to explain human behavior. In contrast, Buddhist philosophy suggests that actions leave consequences, whether visible or not. Even if truth is concealed, it continues to exist. It does not disappear simply because it cannot be observed. This perspective does not provide answers, but it reframes the silence. It implies that absence of evidence is not absence of reality. Disappearance of Sabrina Aisenberg remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in the United States, not because of what is known, but because of what is missing. There is no clear narrative, no definitive conclusion, no moment of closure. Only fragments, interpretations, and a silence that continues to persist across time. For the family, that silence is not abstract. It is lived, repeated, and unresolved. Years pass, yet the question remains unchanged. What happened in that house that night? Without answers, time does not heal. It only extends uncertainty. It is possible the truth has been hidden, buried beneath time and distance. It is also possible it was never fully captured. Both paths lead to the same end, a mystery without resolution, and a question that continues to echo. Cases like this remind us that not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some remain incomplete, not from lack of effort, but due to human limitation. At the edge of understanding, logic fades, and silence becomes louder than any explanation. If this case made you question the line between certainty and doubt, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's explore these mysteries together, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more stories that challenge how we understand the human mind. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.